Was my Patreon member's direct patrilineal ancestor part of the Norman conquest of England?
It's a fascinating story, a journey of survival. Thousands of miles over thousands of years led to this amazing man. From a hunter to a king, let me tell you how it all began. We are his sons. We are I-A11323. We are his sons. We are I-A11323. From the dawn of history to the Viking Age, his sons sail open seas to lands unknown. Fierce warriors in battle as the legends go. From a hunter to a king, let me tell you how it all began. We are his sons.
My Patreon member's direct patrilineal ancestor emigrated from England to the USA in the year 1869. But he can trace his earliest known direct patrilineal ancestor back to the year 1491 in Tipton, England. That being said, though, he does have a habitational surname. So I believe that his direct patrilineal ancestor prior to 1491, when surnames were adopted in England, was living in the town of Derby, which is only 41 miles from Tipton, making it a plausible theory. In the following map, you can see the location of Derby in the Midlands of England. My Patreon member's closest Big Y match has the same surname as his, and FTDNA predicts that their common patrilineal ancestors diverged apart around the year 1574. Based on that age estimate, I predict that this patrilineal divergence occurred somewhere in England near that region of Tipton and Derby. His surname match is a second different patrilineal line to enter America. His match's patrilineal line entered much earlier, sometime during the 1600s. Unfortunately, they are unable to find that common ancestor in England on paper. My Patreon member's next Big Y match diverged apart from his patrilineal line around the year 1123, according to Family Tree DNA mean age estimates. I did some research into his patrilineal line, and it appears that his direct patrilineal ancestor emigrated from Normandy, France to Quebec, Canada during the 1600s. What's really interesting is that the patrilineal divergence for this match is right around the time of the Norman conquest of England in the year 1066. In the famous Domesday book, we know that Norman lords were granted estates in Derbyshire and that they built castles around Derbyshire to subjugate the population. So I feel it's possible, maybe even plausible, that my Patreon member's ancestor could have crossed over from Normandy to England in the year 1066 with the invasion force. Or it could have occurred shortly afterwards, since we know there was gene flow back and forth from England and France because English lords held lands in both modern-day countries. My Patreon member's next upstream Big Y match dates approximately to the pre-Roman Iron Age. The individual only listed the USA for their EKA, so there's not much information we can glean from that test. Anyhow, I'm thinking during that time period, my Patreon members' forefathers were still in the general Scandinavian region. So what can account for the fact that my Patreon member only has 3 Big Y matches since his very proficient Bronze Age subclade I-Z5889, which does have a strong connection with Western Europe in both modern distributions and ancient DNA samples. My theory is that this is the result of his forefathers living in modern-day Denmark from the Bronze Age through to the Viking Age. Denmark is not that well sampled in the family tree DNA database. Furthermore, DNA testing is illegal in France, and this may account for the fact that he doesn't have more matches from Normandy prior to around 1123 CE. The descendants of French Canadians are better sampled in the database than the native French. So my Patreon member is lucky that he does have the one match who had a direct patrilineal ancestor emigrate from Normandy to Quebec. One might say, hey, Derby was one of the 5 boroughs of the Midlands in Danelaw. How do we know that his direct patrilineal ancestor didn't enter England with the Danish Vikings and then have his match go to Normandy, France later on? Albeit possible, I think this is less likely due to the fact that the UK is well sampled in the database. If this were true, I would expect more branching in the UK prior to the year 1123. The same reasoning holds true in trying to assume that his direct patrilineal ancestor might have been an Anglo-Saxon. Once again, to reiterate, I would expect to see more branching prior to 1123 if this were the case. Okay, let's take a look at my Patreon members' STR matches to see if there's anything else to be learned or if there's any promising leads. He has an interesting non-surname match at Y111 that only has a genetic distance of 4 to him. I'm thinking that this is probably an MPE, either somewhere in England or possibly in the United States with his other surname matches patrilineal line. Represented by the red line in the following graph, a real match with only a genetic distance of 4 at Y111 will on average be only 7 generations away. That's why I believe this MPE occurred before my Patreon member's ancestor arrived in the USA in 1869, but after he diverges apart from his other surname match around the year 1574. At Y67, I only see one potential lead. He has a non-surname match with a genetic distance of 6 that has not tested Big Y yet, so we don't know where he diverges apart from my Patreon member. But that being said, my Patreon member has 2 Y67 matches, and I put matches in parentheses, genetic distance of 7, that connect all the way back to the Bronze Age with the IS12289 branch. So there might be some other convergence issues going on with a genetic distance of 6 as well. So worth pursuing, but not to get too hopeful. At Y37, my Patreon member has a non-surname match that has a French surname. So it might be worth it to pursue getting this match upgraded to Big Y700 because of the possible connection to Normandy, France for my Patreon member. But that being said, there's no guaranteed at Y37 of the match connecting to him any closer in time than the Bronze Age, as we saw with convergence at Y67. He has other non-surname matches at Y37 and Y25 as well, but once again, pursue those at your own risk. There's no guarantee that those will be true matches or will give him any additional data more recent in time than the Bronze Age, so do it at your own discretion. Thanks for watching.